the name of His Imperial Majesty, Emperor Haile Selassie Jah Rastafari, Jah Rastafari. I give thanks unto the Creator and to the brethren and sistren for taking part in this evening of Roots and Culture. The theme for this evening is Origin and Destiny. In quoting the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, a people without the knowledge of its past history is like a tree without roots. The gathering this evening is to learn more about I traditions so that I can work for the spiritual and economical upliftment of African people. At this moment, I will introduce RasTafari, whose support and devotion made it possible for this event. He's president of Lion of Judah, a student club here that sponsored this activity, and I give thanks and welcoming brethren RasTafari.
Give thanks unto the Creator. Give thanks unto the Creator and give thanks unto His Majesty, whom without Him, if He didn't show sign, if He didn't come, then all of us would not be here today. So we must hail up the King and give thanks and praise. Jah Rastafari, Jah Rastafari, Jah Rastafari. The Line of Judah basically is an Ethiopian culture club. And as Ethiopians and as Rastafari people, we have to use every opportunity and occasion to highlight our culture and to teach our culture, and most of all to learn our culture. Therefore, this evening, we would like to bring Kess Green to speak on Origin and Destiny, as Empress Madupe Olufumi has said, and to give us more in-depth knowledge coming from the perspective of a priest in the Ethiopian Orthodox Tewahedo Church, to give us that which His Majesty has sent the church unto the West for. I don't have a speech or anything to give. I basically have my peace to give unto you and the Father's peace to say. Jah Rastafari, Jah Rastafari, Jah Rastafari. Always. If anyone has any question or answer as far as anything that I may answer, one may ask it now. If no further questions or anything like that, I would like to read a verse from the King James Bible, but one must remember that the King James Bible is just a carbon copy of the original Bible of Ethiopia, which is the oldest Bible in the world. Give me a moment, thank you. I would like to read from the 133rd Psalm of the priest, prophet, and king, David. Behold, how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. It is like the precious ointment upon the head, that ran down upon the beard, even Aaron's beard, that went down to the skirts of his garments, as the dew of Hermon, and as the dew that descended upon the mountains of Zion, Ethiopia. For there the Creator commanded the blessing, even life forevermore. Glory to the Word, glory to the power, and glory to the sound.
Just Rastafari.
Go ahead.
And it's in relation to whether or not it's observed by the Lion of Judah Club that there is no J letter in the Kizz language of Ethiopia, or language of Ethiopia. A J letter in ancient Hebrew, ancient Greek. So my question is, based on the fact that historically that is so, the observance of JAH as opposed to IAH, you have to question why the preference is on JAH as opposed to IAH.
Very good question, and one thing that I've been taught by my elders, and one thing I teach and also learn with my brothers and sisters with the line of Judah is the very same point which you have brought forth, that there is no J letter in ancient Hebrew, there's no J letter in ancient Guz or Giz of Ethiopia, and there's no J letter in any of the original languages, that the J was a letter that was introduced because of the combination of the D and a hard sound on the D, and therefore was used for certain words which were foreign, or certain sounds which were foreign. But there is a J letter within Amharic. There's not a J letter in Guz, or the ancient Ethiopic language, but there is a J letter within Amharic. And therefore it is observed as such as in line of Judah, is observed within that, because that is a name at this time which most of our people know, or which they hear the word Jew, or they heard of Judah, so therefore most people know of Judah at this time. Therefore education is on a certain ladder. You cannot get to the top unless you start where you're at. So therefore we must bring the people from where we're at in order to get to the heights again, because that is the road back up to Zion. And also, as if you notice, even on the fly within my name, when I first was given the name Adonijah, or Adoniyahu, which is in Hebrew, I used the virgin Adoniyahu, which is in Hebrew, as I've always used it, or Adonias, which is in Guz. Yet at this time I've gone back to the foundation, since most people know me, forward. Give thanks. Forward into the foundation to use Adonias instead of Adonijah. And even with my brothers and sisters, to call upon the Father as Yah instead of Jah, as the name Yahuwah, Yahweh, or the contraction of the form which is Yahweh. So therefore we have to forward, as the brother said, back to the foundation.
Is it possible for you to just quickly read from the Isaiah 52 verse 6?
52 verse 6. Therefore, from the book of Isaiah verse 6, listen my woman. Therefore my people shall know my name. Therefore they shall know in that day that I am he that doth speak. Behold, it is I.
Thank you very much. Most High name is I. Gile Selassie first. His divine name is I. His true name is Gile Selassie. His divine name is I. And therefore, in reference to him as the Most High, the inventor of heaven and earth, it is I. And that's it, just I.
True. Could you read from Exodus chapter 6 verse 3? Or do you have a scripture on it?
No, but you're making reference to the book of when Moses spoke to the Most High concerning his name.
True.
Okay, and if you remember that clearly, he made it quite clear that tell the people that I am, correct?
True.
But remember now that is a Sanskrit rendition of I.
True. I understand that.
So we should not allow ourselves to deviate from I. In whatever form it might come. The J letter came into existence in the 17th century, and it was a perversion of the I letter. It was originally I. For example, Isis, perversion, Jesus. And so, it is within me to make this known. Wherever me go, that I must stand predominant.
True. But also recall that when Moses came down from the mountain, and the Most High revealed to him the name I am that I am. When he came down, when he came down and spoke to the people, he could not say to the people that I am. He said, I am have sent me. When the people referred to the Most High, they referred to him as he. And that's from the word Hua. That's why Yahuwah was a name revealed in the ancient Ge'ez text, which I have seen, and the ancient Hebrew text, and in Torah of the so-called Jews, but it's actually our book. And the Greeks and the rest of them, as you mentioned, came around and perverted that name with not just the J in Jehovah, but also the V, because there's no V consonant in the original language either. So true, I understand the point. And very true. We have to have more education like that in our community. Virgin? True. I understand. That's why right now I want to bring it back to the speaker who is here, who has come a long way from the Ethiopian church to speak unto all of you. True. Therefore, without any further ado, we will bring forth the speaker for this evening of Origin and Destiny, our priest and the priest of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church, Kess Green.
Ja, I'm sticking that in. With my arm, the world of my fiscal First, I wish to thank you all very much for inviting the Ethiopian Orthodox Church to come to share with you this afternoon. It is not a lecture, really. It is a moment of sharing of love, of brotherhood, of a search for self, as was introduced, a search for I. Let us then invite the power of the infinite and eternal to be with us. Let us have a moment of quiet.
RasTafari.
You've asked us this afternoon to concentrate on the topic, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and the Ethiopian World Federation. I wish to apologize for His Eminence Abu Ishaq, who is the Archbishop of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church in the Western Hemisphere, who had put his mind and set his mind to come forward to present and share with you this afternoon. He has been called urgently to Ethiopia. He is there now. He left some time ago on urgent matters over there. As you know, they are preparing a very big international ceremony for His Imperial Majesty a few months from now, and he has been called to participate in the preparation for that. He hopes to be back very soon. Nevertheless, I have been asked to come to you. Before he left, he asked me to come here so that we will not disappoint you. I wish to pay tremendous respect to Sister Mudupe for her efforts in trying to make this possible this afternoon. For those who are here, those who should be here, we would share. It is difficult to speak of the Ethiopian Orthodox Church and not to speak of Ethiopia. It is difficult to confine any lecture or discussion on Ethiopia or the Ethiopian Orthodox Church because it is difficult to find a source or an origin of such a discussion. So perhaps we'll try to put our mind to just a few years in our existence with which we can deal, with which we can interpret, with which we can try to get most out of for our understanding. It is true that Ethiopia is the mother of civilization. It is true that Ethiopia is the mother of mankind. Scientists, anthropologists, historians, all today have agreed to that. There have been many names for Ethiopia. The word Ethiopia was coined by the Greeks. It means the sunburnt people or the dark-skinned people. And it is not confined to just that little horn of Africa there. It meant not just the continent also. It meant all peoples south of Arabia. All peoples in the southern hemisphere, all Santan people have been referred to in history as Ethiopia. There have been other names like Abyssinia. That's a very recent name coined by the Arabs through the Muslim invasion. That's a very recent thing. Ethiopia has made tremendous contribution to world history, to world civilization, to humanity. We'll try to break it down in segments so we can follow. I'll try to be as short as possible, as simple as possible. Even the children perhaps can pick up some points here and there. And we'll have questions, I believe, Sister Madupe, at the end. Okay. So we'll leave room for discussions. This is not a lecture, as I told you. It's a family gathering. So we are all here to share with one another in the spirit of love. This is the essence of black unity. We can go from ancient Ethiopia until about 1000 BC. There were about 14 pharaohs who were Ethiopians in the history of that ancient civilization. So the topic is not here on Egypt or Egypt's civilization. Ethiopia involved southern Egypt. It involved Nubia. It involved the Sudan. Ethiopia is not just a kingdom. A kingdom is one territory with a king. Ethiopia in her history has always been referred to as an empire. That means a series of kingdoms. She always ruled many kingdoms. This is why the leaders very often were emperors, not just kings. So that's the first thing we must understand in our mind. We're not just talking of a small place we know today, that geographical location in the Horn of Africa called Ethiopia. At certain times in history, it includes extreme advance of land, conquered, or sometimes they got together in what is called assimilation. The kings got together and agreed to be under Ethiopian rule. And they extended the empire, whatever. Okay? Very good. So that until that time, she had tremendous influence on the whole world. The Greeks were just yesterday. The Italians were just yesterday compared to Ethiopian civilization. As early as 5,000 years ago, Ethiopia was putting away the dead in coffins made of transparent alabaster. To give you an idea of the civilization. In early times, she first understood the concept of the one true God. When they had to write and document man's or mankind's civilization, they had to depend and look for an Ethiopian history and culture to demarcate the promised land. As you know, the flowed rivers from which they demarcated where the Garden of Eden was. Like that. Even today, I was privileged to see it a few years ago with my wife when we were in Ethiopia, when they found one of the oldest human beings called Lucy, 3.5 million years old. I saw the bone myself, my own eyes, one of the museums. It was in the Ethiopian region, Rift Valley there, that it was located by the greatest scientists of today, the anthropologists. So there is no question about Ethiopian civilization or her influence on world religion, world politics, or world development. But she has fluctuated here and there according to how the history, according to conquest like that. about 1,000 years BC, she merged her empire with the Solomonic Empire. No need to go into it because that is going to take days of discussion perhaps. But that your mind can understand what I am speaking about. Solomon was only the third monarch of the Hebrew nation. Makeda, the queen of Ethiopia, was the 252nd monarch of Ethiopia. Gives you an understanding of the age of the empire again. And we are all familiar, and I see you all here, you all are very in tune with Ethiopian and African history about the marriage between Solomon and the Queen of Sheba Makeda. She went to visit Solomon, not to look for knowledge, but she was sufficiently equipped. She was sufficiently learned to go to test Solomon, to put questions to Solomon, to discuss with him intellectually. She was one of the world's great intellectuals, Makeda. And she went to put hard questions to him, because no one was able to understand or even come close to his wisdom. So impressed was Solomon with her that he asked her to stay. They were married according to the laws of kings. But then she returned home, and you all know about the story of the son she had, Menelik I. She returned with a promise that when the son grew, she would send him back to his father, Jerusalem, to Solomon. And they did keep that promise. It is well known to you also in that history that when Menelik went back to see his father did not want him to return to Ethiopia, but to stay and be the next king of Israel. He said he cannot because he saw at his mother's breast that he would return. Plus he told him, what is there in Jerusalem here for me? I have everything and more at home, and I must return. And we are familiar that he returned, and the gift he was given was the Ark of the Covenant. And Zadok, the high priest, and the firstborn of Israel accompanied him. What we have today as the Falashers, the original Jews, you all know about the history up to today. Up to last year, about 25,000 of them returned to Israel. You had 3,000 years of existence there in Ethiopia. The Ark of the Covenant is still there in Ethiopia, preserved up to today. And so Ethiopia did not only historically merge with Solomon and the Solomonic dynasty, but it was something spiritual. Two sons had come together. The son Shem and the son Ham had merged with the emergence or the emergence of Solomon and Makeda. And they stood together, and the empire grew and continued to share. The next major event was about 2,000 years ago, when the Christ was to be born. It was prophesied years before that Ethiopia will stretch out her hands to God. As you know, quite familiar, it is said that the emperor of Ethiopia, in wisdom and understanding, was able to go to pay his respects to the Christ child. He was one of the three Magi's. It is intellectually debated today that the other two Magi's were also Ethiopians. Because King Izana Obezen, sorry, Zana was before, Obezen, whose name has been contradicted in English again as we were speaking about G and I and V in your letters. He was called Balthazar in modern English. It was the King Bezen, Emperor Bezen. He ruled Ethiopia from 9 BC to 8 AD. At that time, Ethiopia Empire extended into Arabia, extended across the Red Sea, extended everywhere. And the two other kings who were there were also from the Ethiopian Empire. They were kings from kingdoms that were part of the Ethiopian Empire. So there's the three Magi's, already three kings who were Ethiopians. They understood the stars, they understood the time, they understood what was the significance of that time. And they joined, they consulted, and they knew, and they went at that time. And that's a great significance in Ethiopian history. Because some say that today, because of perhaps not yet understood or not yet explained, that it is today Ethiopia is stretching forth the hands to God. No. That is 2,000 years old. Ethiopia confirmed that prophecy and stretched out the hands to God with those gifts 2,000 years ago. And fulfilled prophecy. And shared in the coming of the Christ. And shared in history. This is one of the understandings and the significance of the church. Why? Because at that time, historically, was preparing itself to move from Hebrew into Christianity. And we have to understand that. You see, what we have to understand as a people is that you say it very meaningfully and with full understanding that you move forward and not backward. Forward ever, backward never. Nothing is stagnant or stagnated. Solomon found wisdom because he found that. He understood the movement of time. Everything has time, he said. For everything there is a season, and a time for every purpose under heaven. There is a time to be born, time to die, a time to sow, a time to reap. And everything moves in the rotation of time. Everything moves in its cycle. Even nature, even the seasons, they all move in the order of time. And as history moves on, Ethiopia has been moving on, revolutionizing herself and adjusting to that order. So that her movement at the time of Solomon with the emergence of Sheba, Makeda, was an emergence of two sons coming together. And a time to preserve the ark, which she did. She has always fulfilled history. Moving on a little more, in the year 34 AD, you read even in Acts of the Apostles, you introduce the Bible, that the Minister of Finance under Queen Candace of Ethiopia was returning from Jerusalem to worship. And he was met by the Apostle Philip. He was the vehicle that introduced Christianity into Ethiopia. Western civilization tried to say Ethiopia became a Christian nation in the 4th century. But we know better than that. You know better than that. It is one of the oldest Christian nations in that. And Ethiopia moved, the eunuch carried back, as the Minister of Finance, carried back Christianity to his kingdom. And Christianity began to spread in Ethiopia as early as that time. In the 4th century, the beginning of the 4th century, King Izana proclaimed Ethiopia an official Christian kingdom. As a nation, as a state. Officially she was proclaimed, but Christianity was there before. From the time of the Apostle Philip and the eunuch. Ethiopia, understanding time and the movements, accepted Christianity. What we have to understand is that Ethiopia has always been a powerful military country. The world has, nations have always relied on her emperors and her army to defend them and to come to her assistance when they needed it, which she did very willingly. And she has always been respected the world over. And she continued to grow in the Christian spirit. She continued to grow in the Christian era. When Islam came about with Muhammad, things changed again. Ethiopia influenced the whole northern Africa at that time. It is from that time her kingdom or empire began to dwindle. She was concentrated around Aksum and northern Ethiopia in those areas. And yet, Muhammad Rasulullah said he found favor with and showed sympathy to, and he merged with the Ethiopian emperor. Why? For two reasons. One, his lineage, his grandmother was an Ethiopian. Two, with his emergence, conquering, wherever he went, he found enmity. And what is his message? We have to find out what it is. We cannot reject him like that. And he found refuge in Ethiopia. And he promised, and for those after him, that he must be a friend with Ethiopia. The rest of Africa, Egypt with such power, with such wealth, with such might, the Sudan, Libya, all of them, they are now Islam territory. Ethiopia is the only one that has preserved herself and has withstand the power of Islam and not been conquered. Attacked, fought, struggled throughout the history with Islam and others, but she has not been succumbed by the power of Islam.
All among Zionite, RasTafari.
And she continued in her history with her struggle as any other empire until modern times. What is significant is that the Solomonic dynasty continued almost uninterrupted for 3,000 years. From the 10th 100 BC, which is 1000 BC, until the present time with his imperial majesty. And he was able to trace his lineage through the Solomonic dynasty. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church has preserved Africanism as no other part of Africa has done. And this has been one of her strengths. A society is built on structures, and we have to understand that in modern times. If we're thinking of unity, if we're thinking of progress. The structures are economic structures, political structures, social structures, like recreation and things that are socialized, legal structures, the family structure, but most importantly, the religious structure. And throughout the history of the entire continent, as you know, the continent of Africa has been called Ethiopia even from earliest times, a Kipuland. The structure on which Africans have depended and have relied and have centered around as their superstructure on which everything else built is the religious structure. Whether in Egypt, down to Zimbabwe, wherever, the African civilization have always centered around its spirituality. Economic, political, everything else have been influenced from that center, that base, the religious structure. This is why the African, wherever he is, has such an affiliation, a love for things religious. He searches because he knows that is his spirituality is his base of existence as a human being. The rest of Africa lost it. Ethiopia did not lost it. That was one of the reasons for her strength and preservation, even up to today. And if we are to talk about unity and talk about regaining roots, we got to understand that superstructure. You've got to understand the struggle to regain that superstructure, because it has been changed. It was changed about 400 years ago and replaced by the economic structure. The economic structure is the superstructure of the world today. Everything else centers around the economy. But it has not been so from the beginning. So it is difficult for the African man to find back his footing in terms of building a society when the world is controlled by a structure in which he is alienated. He's like a fish out of water. You've got to understand that. That you'll find your brother will be willing to sell you for a penny, for a job. Why? Because that is the survival of today, how it is. That is the reality of today as well. It's a point to note in terms of wanting to understand development and progress. So that the Ethiopian Orthodox Church has been able to influence the rest of the country. Until the 20th century, she controlled the entire education system in Ethiopia. All the leaders, all the intellectual people, all the peasants, everyone passed through the religious structure before they could become leaders in their respective fields. That religion controlled the destiny of the people. This is why they are so different. This is why they are so wise. Compared to modern times, it is considered backward. It is considered uncivilized, perhaps. It is considered one of the poorest countries, but she has never been conquered. But all the others still have the dignity and the respect as a people because of her spirituality. And you've got to understand that. In modern times, perhaps, as I said, it is difficult to speak about Ethiopian Orthodox Church, or about Ethiopian isolation, without understanding history, or geography, or economics, or politics. You have to understand that. Italy tried many times to conquer her. Why? Not just to rule her, to bring her under Rome, but to use her as a vehicle to get to Islam. Because the center of Islam was in Jerusalem. You've got to understand the nature of Islam. Islam is not a religion of the 6th and 7th century with Muhammad. She's a religion that has stability, has history, has identity with Judaism. Because she is legally, she is indigenously, she has full claim because she is the firstborn of Abraham. Ishmael. With 2 children, because there were 2 wives. Abraham had 2 wives. Hagar, on the rich line of Ishmael, Islam stands, and she was the firstborn. And you all know the understanding of firstborn. And then there was Hannah, on the other hand, when she was 90 years old, and Abraham was 100 years old. Sarah, that they had the child, on which line came Judaism and Christianity today. So you understand the struggle. They are both fighting for one place. One place they are fighting for. The Jews, the Hebrews call it Jerusalem. The Muslims call it Palestine. It's one land, with one legal claim. You got to understand it. Okay? Perhaps we can talk about that during the question because I don't want to keep you too long, but it's a very important part in understanding our identity, our history today in modern times. Because we are caught between it, and if you don't understand it, everybody can be an enemy with one another. Other part of it is that within modern times, because of that, we have to understand the concept of slavery. Because of that, we have to understand our position today in the West and in the world. Slavery was nothing to do with race. Race was only an excuse used very recently to cover up for the evils in slavery. Economics was only an excuse used to cover up intellectually for the evils of slavery. The reason was religion. Islam versus Christianity. Unless you do not understand the Dark Ages, or that 700 years, which had nothing to do with the darkness in terms of Africa, but darkness in terms of ignorance, darkness in terms of European ignorance, and the control of Europe by Islam, who then was associated, and its roots and everything was Africa, that you'll understand the enmity that happened between Europe and Africa and the revenge that took place with slavery. Africa, having left and abandoned her indigenous religion and having embraced Islam in the 6th and 7th century and having become wealthy and strong through Islam because of the trade on the Sahara Desert from east to west, having embraced it and having identified itself with Islam, and Islam having not only defeated but disgraced European Christianity for 700 years, it was a revenge. Africa suffered. It was because of religion. Africans who came to the West were Muslims, treated like beasts of burden. Economics came in later. Race came in later. And then the partition of Africa in the 19th century, 1884, 1885, in which Europe sat down, America was present, and divided Africa, who will take what and who will take where. That they realized that the heart of Africa was Ethiopia. And she was not there for spoils. Italy decided to invade her and make her one of her territory. Then we have the Battle of 1888, 1889, with which a few Ethiopians with sticks and swords and shields were able to defeat the Italians with their planes and their all-modern machinery of death at that time, the victory of Adwa. It was something that surprised not only Italy, but the world, how little Ethiopia could defeat mighty Italy. It was then that Ethiopia began to assimilate all her territory and to reorganize herself and to reach out in the world. And the emperor that we have to understand in terms of modernization of Ethiopia is Emperor Theodore, who was followed by Menelik II, then his imperial majesty. It is that struggle to destroy, to fight, destroy, and overcome the forces of oppression, and to put some light into darkness, which we are today still struggling to put a foundation to, that emanated from that period, which is the second point of what we want to discuss. the Ethiopian World Federation. It is from that time that the world began, how can they put that little part of Africa, that remaining part, Ethiopia, under its control? And they could not. Ethiopia began to dance and swing and thing, until she began to tell the world that black people have a voice. There is a voice somewhere in the world that gives black people identity, to which black people must be proud. We today cannot understand the human degradation of the ancestors inside and outside Africa, and it was worse inside of Africa for the Africans there and for the Africans outside of Africa. Total control by the European powers, spiritually, economically, socially, family, whatever. And the world began to struggle and struggle until, as Regent, His Imperial Majesty began in the beginning of this century. And then very quickly went into the powerhouse of the world, the League of Nations, and joined it as an empire, as a